Hi, my name is Mattia Murray, and welcome to The Longer Road. You are on the longer road if you have multiple intersectional identities that are often marginalized. You've had to work harder to get to the starting line, and you might feel behind. I'm here to provide hope, support, and practical tips, and to let you know that you're not alone. Welcome to my guest, Deb Malkin. She or they are a lovely person I know from the internet and groups that we're in together, and also has a podcast called Move with Deb, which I will put in the show notes. And I just want to say, I'm sure you'll probably be horrified at what I'm about to say, but like when I'm on Instagram and just scrolling, basically every time I see your content, when you post like some of your movement content, my first thought is, oh my God, who's that hot person? And then I'm like, oh my God, I know them.
I'm totally blushing. So just going to say, and blushing is a mind body experience. I feel like I have to also say that as a embodiment coach.
Jumping right in with that. Yes. Mind body blushing. That's the title.
Mm-hmm. Totally.
And
well, that's very exciting.
I would,
That is really my goal, is for people to be like, oh, yummy. And then also be like, oh, and then they're saying something really interesting and profound.
that's how we do it on the internet. So is there anything you'd like to add about who you are, how you think about yourself in this moment in time?
Sure. Oh, I love that you say in this moment in time also, because I think the most important thing that I want to say right now is like, I'm 53 years old. And I think that why I say that is like, I've been many people. I'm sure I'm going to become many people. And then at the heart of it is there is me. And I'm just a very like heart-centered person who deeply believes that change is possible. And like on a lot of different levels. And where I'm working in it right now is helping people feel connected to their bodies, helping people change their experiences with unpleasant sensory experiences like chronic pain, emotional overwhelm, fear, however that's showing up in the body. So the work that I'm doing is like in our individual bodies, because I'm doing one-on-one coaching, but it also holds the context of who we are inside of a social body, how and what, whatever it is that we've learned about our bodies and how that informs how our like individual physiological experience shows up for ourselves in a day-to-day basis. So now I'm also thinking of myself as like an embodiment storyteller, which I have a lot of trauma about thinking of myself as a storyteller because I was a theater kid and I wanted to be a storyteller in that realm and had a lot of difficulty but now I'm like, oh no, there is these stories that we're telling ourselves all the time. And sometimes the distance, like the gap that I help people build a bridge over is like, how do we tell a different story about what's happening in our body? And then that changes how we experience the world. So that's what I do over Zoom and by posting pictures of me walking or, doing things on the internet. It's kind of hilarious, this world.
It really is. I am obsessed with this idea of embodiment storyteller, both because I think when the person telling the story is embodied, that is so different. And I'm thinking back to, say, when I started therapy, and I don't know, probably the first 10 years I was in talk therapy, there was like little to no embodiment going on. It was just, and I could talk about my life in like very placidly. I was not feeling it. Nothing was happening in here. I'm like waving at my body. There's like nothing going on in here. It was all very intellectualized, which was useful for the level of trauma that I had. And it was so like, I just think back to me telling that as a story and how it wasn't even necessarily having, that much of an impact, say, if I was trying to share with someone else, because I was just not in it at all. Like it was not it was just like a way that I was used to saying those things.
Yeah. And what's interesting is so like I come at it from this framework of like whatever we're doing, like if we're surviving, whatever, like we're doing something right.
Mm-hmm.
Right? We have all these systems in the body and they happen and they go without our conscious awareness. Right? If we had to remember to breathe, like we wouldn't make it very far. Right? So there's just our bodies are designed for survival. And some of our thinking and feeling states, we get into habits and patterns that perpetuate that survival. But then sometimes we want to be like, yeah, but also that's now not working for me anymore.
Yeah.
Like, how can I update those pieces so I can feel differently and feel better and honor the fact that like, that was really useful. That was what you needed at that time, was that level of dissociation.
Right.
And I don't mean that in a negative way.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't know if that's the word that you would use.
No, I'm a very pro dissociation space here.
Yeah.
It's effective. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it is effective. And even just the idea that dissociation is always negative, that's like a narrative that like, where does that come from? Right. Like, where do we have those stories? And so the way that we like pay attention and notice and track our own experience, that's what I do a lot of. Today, I just hung out with a client when she was feeling sadness, and we just like slowed it down and paused and made some space for sadness to be felt and for that to be safe, while we're watching her brain like, you know, almost want to come and hijack her and like pull her away and take her out of that experience. And we're like, yeah, your brain is really used to doing that. In that conversation, I use a lot of metaphors. In that conversation, I was like, oh, it's like debate club. Like she's used to having this constant debate going on between her mind and body. And I was like, yeah, we want to go from living in debate club, maybe to going to drama club, where we know like this is the room where we feel things. We do trust falls. We do weird stuff, and we change that feeling in our body and we make it feel more safe. So we practice together because, you know, just the person at the grocery store may not be the one who's going to practice embodiment skills with you.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe. You never know. If you're in California, maybe. You never know who you're standing next to. But having a place to come and practice and be intentional and to work on that beautiful power of neuroplasticity and bioplasticity that we have as part of our human birthright. Like we just have it. We're born with it, everybody. And so then it's like using that superpower for good. And I like to try to do that with people in a way that feels like fun. Like literally my last client right before here, we were actually working on stuff around exercise and movement, which I know we're going to talk a little bit about. And she was just like, yeah, this conversation feels fun. And even just the talking about it changes the experience of it. So I'm very much like, yeah, I have the goggles on. I'm drinking the Kool-Aid. Like embodiment is my most favorite thing to help people with and like bring into even my own conversations.
So I have two questions for you from what you just said. One of which is, you know, just this broad question of why you think embodiment is so cool and like what it does for people. And I want to share one story about just this little experience I had recently. And then my second question is around making it fun and like, how do you do that? Or like, how do you define that? Like what makes it fun in those conversations? So first I'm going to tell my little story and then I will hopefully remember and repeat my questions.
Sounds good.
Which is
new ones.
I was thinking the other day about how, you know, how much more I'm in my body than I used to be and how, you know, how many lovely big things that's done for me. I just noticed you have a picture of a butt over there, all the way on the side.
I do. There's my butt.
Oh, that's so nice. And then, okay, so I was out walking and I just started to notice how different every part of my body and movement felt relative to let's say 8 years ago, like coming out as genderqueer was a big part of that for me, just feeling more comfortable. But also that I had so much physical tension that was causing me so much chronic pain. And you don't necessarily notice tension when it's there, but damn, do I notice it not being there, spending more time in my body. And I was just noticing, like, wow, like the way my shoulders are moving, the way my torso is moving, I can feel my intercostals being like looser than they usually are, just like that level of
Mhm.
body awareness. That's one of the things embodiment has done for me, is just this like
Mhm.
release and like relief, physical relief, certainly of pain, but just this feeling of like, wow, I'm literally moving differently in the world. And it's just getting better and better.
Yeah. And that like, oh, I love that like idea that it's getting better and better, even as you get older and older.
Mm-hmm.
Because that to me is one of the most like insidious narratives around that we like hear around
Mm-hmm.
aging is like we only get, stiffer. We only feel more pain. We only are less loose. You're right. And so it's like, even just like that little, like, yeah, it gets better and
Yeah.
better. And like, we don't even know how much better it can get as we go on. So I love that you've had that experience. Like, that is so powerful. Not only are you having it, you're noticing it, you're understanding the difference between then and now. And that level of awareness is like what I'm always working with people to help cultivate. Because I even said this in my last session. Of course, you don't want to be feeling your body if the only thing you're feeling is tension and pain.
Exactly.
Like, it makes sense to then retreat into the mind and disconnect from the body. Sometimes, like I work with clients from lots of different places. So it kind of just depends on what it is that is going on for them. And so sometimes where we work is leaning into positive sensations. So turning up the volume. So almost if we are imagining, because everything we feel is because of our body and our mind. So it's never an either or, it's always together. But imagining if there was a control room and we could turn up the volume on the sensations that feel good, feel pleasurable, bring us joy, and then practicing that, noticing what that feels like, noticing the moments that you do feel relief. When you shift out of fear, how does that feel in your body? And really just playing and starting to bring awareness and the ability then to pay attention and see and feel changes itself breaks that habit of like leaving, of always retreating, of feeling something that feels like uncomfortable, or I just like to say uncomfy, because just make it a little bit, that word feels more gentle, right? So it feels uncomfy and we want to feel comfy, right? So how do we attend to and notice that with curiosity, with friendship? So how we attend to ourselves and attune, we can always create more safety, even when we're noticing discomfort. Making ourselves like a safe home base is, I think, like if there was an umbrella idea, that's the umbrella. And then there's just so many different ways to create that.
How do you make that fun with people?
Ah, I use weird words. I am not serious. I'm not a doctor. Like, I am not an authority, right? Like, I believe in play. And I'm also not afraid of people having strong emotions and like being in an experience that is painful. So we also just make room for what needs experiencing to be experienced. But there's a way, like I am just like a loving witness, but also a cheerleader and like a total goofball. So if there's a joke to be made, it will get made. And I think there's a concept in pain reprocessing about really working on like positive affect. Like it is a part of the therapeutic process. And I think about, there was this great study, or not a study, but like Norman Cousins. I don't know what he was. So I don't know. There's a big gap in my knowledge. But he was like a dude and he wrote some books, and it was like one is called maybe The Laughter Cure or something. So he was sick and then he watched a lot of Marx Brothers movies.
Oh, that guy.
And
Yeah.
got better, right? That guy. And so what we're looking at is like the power of humor, but it isn't just like go watch something funny. It's like find lightness, right? Like cultivating that quality. And I just think like this is part of what we do together. It's very hard to feel like things are solvable and fixable if both people in the conversation are like, yeah, this is terrible and nothing will change.
Yeah.
So it's like there's nowhere to go from there. Yeah. So I hold open the like biggest frame for people's embodied change. And then I think of what we do together as play, you know?
Yeah.
And so it's hard to not be playful when you're like, we're going to play. Let's play with this. Let's see what happens, right? Like, and helping people shift out of this need to control everything. And believe me, I have been there. Like it is very, very, it's like the most tantalizing illusion that if we control everything, everything will be safe.
Oh, that's a whole, oh my God, that's a whole thing. There's so much there. Like need for control, the illusion of control. And I actually, this is not even a stretch. I actually have a specific transition here that made me think of that I would like to transition into talking with you about movement, because I just interviewed Sophia Apostle, who runs the Fat Joy podcast. And one of the things,
great.
Yeah, I love her. One of the things she said was, there are over 200, I don't remember the exact number, but they're like over 200 individual factors that go into health, of which diet and exercise are only 2. And yet we're told, as individuals that like, this is how we can control and like make our bodies, optimally functional and healthy, even though it's really just like this teeny tiny part. And one of the reasons I had reached out to you to be here is that I have really been having this like really interesting processing over the last year or so myself of realizing how much I hate exercise, but I love movement. And I think of movement as being, like the big bubble, and exercise is like a part of it. But it's not just that I hate like diet culture, which I also do because it is also terrible. But like, one of the things I really don't like about exercise as a thing of like, I go and I do this thing really hard and I push this muscle, to its breaking point or whatever, literally, so it could get bigger, which I've done before. I've done like, big gym time, especially leading up to a surgery that I had. And what I don't like about it is I dislike the thing itself. I don't like the sensation of the pushing myself that far. I really dislike the soreness afterwards. Like I don't like that sensation either. And, but what I do like, for example, is I have this little like non-mechanical elliptical behind me that's just feet. And I will literally do that for like 2 minutes at a time. So I love like I'm like, oh, I'm moving. This is fun. Like I'm using my body, but it doesn't hurt me and it doesn't have any like long-term pain from it. And anyway, that's just like one aspect of like what I was thinking about around exercise. But I really I've been thinking a lot about this topic and how, because of this like big societal message about it and all this weird control stuff about it and just like lies we're told about it, a lot of people with, say, chronic pain like me end up just not moving because it feels dangerous and like something we can't control. So anyway, I know that's like a lot of topics I just threw at you, and I am
it's great.
Very happy with any direction you go with any of that.
I mean, like I always sometimes what I start with is, what movement are you already doing that you're not noticing? Right. So we think about, oftentimes we don't think of like, getting up and going to the bathroom as movement, but actually, of course it is. Right. So what kinds of movement are we doing throughout the day, throughout our lives without awareness? And that's variable for different people. right? So just starting where you are, starting where you start. And when we start to notice things, we can be intentional about it. But I don't mean intentional like, seriously, we're like doing this fitness goal, right? But intention, which is like, it is again about this storytelling. Here's a great example. I had a client I was working on with around back pain, and she had some movement goals, and she wanted to walk up this hill in her neighborhood to go to the 7-Eleven. Because I was like, let's identify a goal, right? Because otherwise it's like sometimes like too amorphous. Like we don't have any measurements. We don't know. We have to like bring it up a little bit to notice like what our resistance is. I love resistance. Resistance is like the beautiful place in your nervous system where it's like really communicating something.
Yes.
So we want resistance. We don't want to live in it, but we want to notice it. We want to call it in. We want to be like, what is workable here? So she had this goal and this hill and this thing that she wanted to do. And then we were just in her life. And I was like, okay, just notice like how much you're moving. What are you doing? And then she started house hunting. And she was like, oh yeah, this weekend we saw like 5 houses, and I went up and down the stairs and I looked at all the houses, and she was just noticing how she wasn't in pain. And I was like, all right, well, if we were to think about all those houses that you looked at and all the stairs you went up and down, and we kind of measured it and compared it to this hill that you want to go up. I was like, do you think it's the same distance? She's like, yeah, that's probably like 5 times the distance from this hill. She had a whole story about like any time walking up the hill felt a little hard. All of this shame, this like negative self-talk, this, anti-fat bias, like all of the fear about not being able to move would just crash into her mind and basically would like stop her body, right? Or you just have that experience of like, I have to push through, right? So if we only give ourselves 2 options of not doing things or pushing through, you're going to have the experience of both of those. When we're not doing things, we have the experience of not doing things. When we only push through, what we get is more of the feeling of pushing through, which is basically telling our bodies to shut up. And we create more ignoring. And really what we want to do is notice what feels hard. And then, and there's different tools like somatic tracking or whatever, but notice the thoughts and the feelings that come up and start to tell that story in a different way. So with her, it was super easy. I was like, you just like looked at these 5 houses and whatever and walked up and down the stairs and you felt fine. So like, all right, now go walk up that hill and see what comes up. And she was like, yeah, it was not a big deal. And I was like, cool. So that isn't really like physical training, like it's so much more than that. But we do start kind of like, what are you doing? How does that feel? How does that feel in your body? Like, okay, you really hate soreness. Sometimes it's like noticing, like, how do we allow some soreness to arise so that you can, if you have goals of getting stronger, maybe there's some soreness. Maybe it's like how the frequency of you're doing an activity. So it's a lot of like problem solving and storytelling at the same time, and then going and doing activities and just seeing what happens and notice, or, just being like kind of finding solutions that feel really good. Just be like, are the activities that you're doing right now meeting your current and like future needs?
Oh, I like that as a question. Are these activities meeting your current and future needs?
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Yeah, and it's funny because again, like one of the things I realized for myself around like why I was so resistant to just the term exercise and like doing these things that were in my mind like completely pointless is like I love, say for example, I love going on a walk or like a hike if my ankles can do it. Like I like doing these things that where I'm like going somewhere or looking at cool things. I love being in nature. So like there are things that are exciting and interesting to me and that I like being able to have the strength to do. And to
Yeah.
me, for example, just like being able to run far. Well, also just hate running, but like being able to like run farther. I'm like, why?
Yeah.
I don't want to do that.
Yeah.
I'm not going anywhere. I'm just doing a thing that I hate for an interminable amount of time.
Yeah. And it's like, yeah, they made us do things like that in school.
Yeah.
Yeah. But that's the beautiful part about being an adult,
Yes.
right? Is like getting to choose. But, you know, and to bounce off of that story, you're like, I would love to go on more hikes, and my ankles, like there's a limitation that I'm noticing with my ankles. Like the motivation to go on a hike is going to bring you into contact with the thing that needs a little bit of attention and care.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So you're like, I'm going to go to PT or look at YouTube. These days, you can just basically meet 10,000 PTs on YouTube, or I'm going to go like figure out some of these activities that I'm going to do that are going to help strengthen my ankles so I can go do the things that I want to do. And it's, you know, I can say it like that. And it's not, I also want to recognize for people with chronic pain, for people with mobility issues, not as simple as that.
Mm-hmm.
But also physiology is not it's not mysterious and complicated either.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there is a reason why, like an exercise physiology, like you get better at the things you do more of when they're at the right load. And for me, when I work with people on like mindset and on the sensory experiences, it's like, how do we create the experience of, even if it's discomfort, as safe as possible? So it really is like creating a relationship with noticing unpleasant sensations. Where do they fall inside this spectrum of like safe to dangerous,
Mm-hmm.
right? It's the brain is really incredible in telling the story of what pain is, right? But we want to move away from only like a biomedical metric of pain, right? So if something hurts, it doesn't always mean there's something wrong in your body. And I think that's really helpful when we can expand out from that idea. And I think anybody who's got any like sensory sensitivity, like I really want you to expand your idea of that, because for those of us who like feel things more brightly or loudly, then of course we're going to feel all the things more. And so I think that really helps me when I am doing physical activity. And you know, I'm 53 years old. I'm a fat person, and you know, whatever, like nobody's going to be like, you are the exercise specialist, even though
you literally are.
That is a feature of work that I've done. But right, like nobody would perceive me in that way. And that's fine, except for the people who do. I know that when I'm doing a physical activity, if I encounter some discomfort or pain, that's not a red light. That's not a stop. Like if I stepped in a hole and twisted my ankle, that's a different experience. But as I'm moving along and doing an activity, I am now not afraid if I encounter something that feels like pain. Like I have a whole toolkit to be able to work with that experience. And oftentimes it just shifts and changes really quickly. And when I was younger, I had no framework for that. I just felt like if something hurt, it was my fault. It was because I was fat. And then I would the only solution was being less fat. And that was what everybody said.
Because no straight size people have chronic pain.
Of course not. No straight size. It's really fun now as a, fat pain coach, right? Working with people in smaller bodies. And I'm just like, they come with the same stories. And I'm just like, well, people of all sizes experience pain.
Yeah.
And it's like some of the stories about weight and its correlations to pain, like they're all in there. Doesn't matter. People are afraid of these messages, and these stories create so much fear in people's bodies.
Yeah.
And it leads them down the wrong therapeutic track.
Right.
That's the thing that also I think is like people pursue the wrong treatment. And that makes me very mad.
Yeah. Same. Especially when people are actively trying to get the treatment that would actually help and are having it turned away, which is again a whole nother big thing.
Yes.
One thing I actually
Yeah.
wanted to share, I wasn't even thinking of this until you were talking about like being able to tolerate pain and it being like different on different days, is
Mm-hmm.
I was reading just a short story by an athlete, taught like a professional athlete, talking about that and how like, you know, the extreme differences day to day in their perception of their own ability. And
Mm-hmm.
I was like, oh, I guess in my head, I just assumed that, like, if you're a pro athlete, what that means is this is easy for you. But I know from having a sister who was a professional dancer that, like, it's just fucking hard work and your body hurts all the time, right? Like, that's, nobody in a certain sense, not that no one should, but like, no body is meant to do that level of labor and activity. We've just created it
Mm-hmm.
as this, type of thing that you can do. And some people like it and that's cool. But it's not like, oh, there are people who are just so athletic that this is easy for them. It's like, no, this level of activity is hard for everyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And when we think about kind of what goes into pain perception, there's like the central sensitization of the nervous system, right? So it's the thing that's saying, like, danger, danger, like, take your hand off the hot stove before your skin melts off, right? We want to feel the pain,
Yeah.
right? We want to feel that pain. People who don't feel pain don't live very long because bad things happen to their body, right? So pain is a signal to pay attention, right? If you have your hand on a hot stove, pay attention, take your hand off the hot stove is often a cue to do something. One of my clients talked about now when she feels some discomfort, she actually realizes what it is a cue to do more movement, that the
Mm,
body is craving something.
yeah.
Because she had gone from being kind of a fear, like she had had an injury and then she'd stopped moving this part of her body. It was her shoulder. And then there's also this concept of a homunculus, which is like the map, the neuro map in your brain of parts of your body. And so that can get unwired as we move less. And so, but the answer then is to move more, but like in the right kinds of ways. So then to build up neuro associations between these body parts. So she just finally was like, oh, this is actually my body craving some movement to bring this part of my body back into me. We started working with visualizations about how that arm and that shoulder are a part of her. And so reincorporating that. So we started working with like using that arm, which was her non-dominant arm. I was like, using that more frequently. So placing a demand on the body part that has very kind of low movement, like previously had low movement, right? So when we increase the demand, we're asking the brain to link these things together. If we don't ask the brain to do it, it's not going to do it on its own. So that's why we can't, it's very hard to get better at something if we don't do it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all about kind of the frequency, the load, and then the quality of the attention that we bring to it, the way that we bring, right, kind of care and thoughtfulness or whatever. And there's always, sometimes they're just stories that need rewriting. But yeah, it's like we can't, bodies are amazing. Life would be really dull if we were only actually a brain. We wouldn't really feel anything at
Yeah.
all. We wouldn't get to feel all the things that we really enjoy if we didn't have it.
Yeah. And something I just want to share with people, because I don't know if I've actually talked about this before on the podcast, and it's a thing that I've used a lot that's helped me a lot, is if you are in this place where you're starting to use a body part or stretch a body part where you have discomfort or pain or, habitual like thing, negative associations with that area for whatever reason, visualization, which you mentioned, is so incredibly useful. And it's not literally seeing the thing moving. It's imagining it moving where you're actually activating the motor neurons in the brain. And there's a couple ways to use this. One of which I've really, really liked is doing some motion and then holding still and just imagining doing the motion again a little bit bigger. And this is something that you can just keep doing. And the thing that's so wild about this is you can literally build muscle through imagination. Like, this is a real thing. Athletes do this. They hire, hypnotists and other professionals to help train them in how to do this. Like, this is a thing. And it is
Mhm.
so, so, so useful as a starting point with things like chronic pain, because it's this brain retraining part and not just the physical retraining part. It's telling the brain, like, this is safe. I can move this part of my body. I can do this thing. This is safe. And doing it in your imagination first, or the other way I like to use it is I will do this sometimes if I am just really feeling too scared to actually do the movement. I'll just purely do the imagination part. This works when you're laying down in bed if you don't want to get out of bed, right? Like, this is just a way to use your brain in one of the just like weirder, cool things it can do without forcing your body to do something that it does not currently want to do.
Yeah. I love that, right? It's about building the what else is there to do besides not doing something and forcing ourselves to do something,
Exactly.
right? So that goes in that toolkit. And I love that it also gives ourselves something else to do besides, sometimes we ruminate, like ruminate is an action that our mind does.
Not me. I've never ruminated.
No, me neither. But I hear it that other people do it.
Mm-hmm.
And what they say about it, right, is like, it's almost like, it's where our brain goes. It's an activity that ends up happening that's reinforcing this story because, that's what feels safe. So even cracking open that little bit of safety, coming in contact with what feels scary. Yeah, let's just do that in our mind first. Because then also we get to be like, oh my God, that experience, like I had a different experience. I had a corrective experience. That's kind of how we frame it in like mind body work, as a corrective experience. But you're like, yeah, and you did that with your mind. So then we're just like, okay, what are we even talking about here? Right? Like, we just get to believe more is possible because we're breaking out of these old stories that we've always, that have been told to us about us. And, and it's like, you can't know what you don't know.
Join us next week for part 2. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening. If you know someone who would be helped by this podcast, please share it with them. And I'd love to hear your thoughts and suggestions at mattia@mattiamurray.com. That's MATTIA at MATTIAMAUREE.com. Thank you.